What's up guys, Starlink here. So, Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening remake recently came out, to rave reviews across the board, but I figured, what the hell, why don't I talk about it anyways, because Link's Awakening happens to be a big part of my childhood, like many others out there, and it happens to be my favorite top-down Zelda title. Yes, I like to separate the full 3D titles from the top-down ones. I'm weird, so sue me. But anyways, without further ado, let me give you my 2 cents on what I thought of The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening on the Switch. Let's take a look. Ah yes, Link's Awakening, a title that many out there, including myself, hold very near and dear to our hearts. It was the very first portable Zelda adventure and considered by many fans to be one of the series' best. For me personally, this is my favorite top-down Zelda title. I always loved Link's Awakening for its sense of mystery. Link braving a treacherous storm out in the middle of the ocean and being washed ashore on a tropical island full of weird and quirky characters, with a giant egg looming in the distance and a talking owl spouting nonsense about waking some windfish. It was a lot to take in as an 8-year-old boy, and I loved it. Although I played some of the previous Zelda titles prior, Link's Awakening was the first one to truly grab me and make me a fan of the series. So of course I was excited to hear that we were finally going to see a remake of Link's Adventure on Koholint Island. I even replayed the DX version on the Game Boy Color just to see every little detail that's changed between the two. So how did it all turn out in the end? Well, it's safe to say that this is almost an exact replica of the original game, only with a fresh coat of paint and a few minor changes here and there, for better or worse. You are still traveling through the overworld and delving into dungeons, defeating nightmares, and collecting the 8 instruments needed to wake the windfish the same way you remember. Only this time, you have a crap ton more heart pieces and seashells to collect. Seriously, they really went overboard here. There are now 32 pieces of heart and 50 seashells to collect versus the 12 and 26 found in the original game. Now I get that they were trying to pad out the length a bit here, giving you more stuff to do and all, but it just seems like unneeded fluff to me. I can forgive the seashells, I guess, but they really didn't need that many more heart containers in a game that was already easy enough to begin with. Couple that with the fact that you can now carry 3 bottles with fairies along for the ride makes it feel even more unnecessary. They don't automatically revive you though, you have to physically use them. Crazy Tracy's special medicine still does that for you instead, which was also in the original game. But I digress. There are plenty of changes that I really enjoyed, like fleshing out the fishing minigame for instance, with more types of fish and items to collect. The crane minigame has been completely expanded upon, adding in a whole bunch of collectible figurines to grab other than just Yoshi. It's a great way to make some rupees early on in the game as well if needed. The crane itself has more realistic physics compared to the original game as well, which means items will be a little harder to grab a hold of, but you eventually get used to it, and I had a lot of fun collecting all the figures. Screw Bow Wow though. I had a hard time collecting that figure for some reason. Seriously, that thing seems to have a mind of its own. You now have 2 options to choose from in the Rapids ride, that being the Raid, which was present in the original, and a new race option. The race was probably added in for that extra heart piece and seashell, I'm sure. You also retain the piece of power and defense boosts for a set period of time now, which is a nice touch. In the original game, the effect lasted until a certain amount of damage was taken. I prefer this change, honestly. Some of the boss battles have been changed up a bit as well, either making them easier or just a little bit more frustrating. For example, the 5th dungeon boss requires you to use the hook shot to fish him out and attack his weak point. In the original game, you could just wail on him with your sword until he retreats back in his hole. In the remake though, you have to use the hook shot, then walk over to his side and hit his weak point directly. I like this change though, as it makes the fight just a little more challenging. Another minor change that confused me for a moment was found in a few puzzles involving the horse statues found within dungeons. In the original game, you just kept throwing them around until they stood up, which could take some time because it was random. In the remake, however, you have to slot them into these indentations on the floor to make them stand up, which I'll be honest with you, took me a minute to figure out. I knew that they had to go into the tiles on the floor, but what took me a moment to realize was that they had to hop diagonally from where they land to the tile. I was just throwing them on there directly, wondering why they kept hopping off. A nice added bonus is that they stay there no matter how many times you leave and re-enter that room. With the original, you had to do it over again. I liked these changes overall, and I thought it was a pretty clever puzzle, to be honest. Some other minor changes in the overworld map to make crossing certain areas more manageable was a nice touch, in particular their warp points. Not only are there more of them to make getting from point A to point B a lot quicker, but you can utilize Monbo's song to warp to any one of them, which is great. In the original, you could only warp to Monbo's pond. Of course, one of the most obvious changes that everybody would know by now is that the sword, shield, power bracelets, and dash boots are always active instead of taking up an item slot, which is hell of convenience. It was always a hassle going in and out of the menu screen hundreds of times in the original game. It was also a nice surprise to find out that you can now keep the boomerang without trading in any other item, most likely the shovel, as long as you pay for it. Another little thing that I noticed is that you can reflect more enemy attacks with the mirror shield this time. I mean, not only can you reflect the beams of light that are shot at you from the statues and dungeons and take them out, but you can also reflect the spears that the moblins in the overworld throw at you, and it actually reflects back at them and kills them, which I think is pretty neat. I'm also glad to see that they kept most of the activities you do with Marin within the remake as well, with some minor exclusions. For example, the photo event in the DX version that takes place near the windmill is missing from the remake, unfortunately. I thought it was a pretty funny event myself. I mean, just look at Marin's face right here. She looks like she's about to murder Terran. Now, one of the biggest changes that was made in the remake was with the inclusion of Dompe and the chamber dungeons. This seems to be the most nitpicky part of the game for some people. For me personally, I liked putting the dungeons together, but actually playing through them got very tedious over time. The problem lies in the fact that every dungeon ends up feeling the same because you have already been in these chambers within the main game itself already, so you already know what to expect coming into it. Plus, you can't share them online. You have to save the dungeon to an amiibo and share it that way, which feels like a missed opportunity. Couple that with the fact that you have to complete various challenges given by Dompe, and you'll likely lose interest with things getting repetitive really quickly. Yes, it's optional, but it's the only way you'll be able to get all the heart pieces, bottles, and seashells, so take it for what it's worth, I guess. Now you can spice things up a bit by placing more slimes within a room, or hazards like dropping bombs from above, and if you happen to have the Link's Awakening amiibo, you can add Shadow Link into the mix. No joke, he definitely outranks every enemy in the game, and that includes the final boss. Another thing that kinda sucks about the inclusion of the chamber dungeon is that they axed the Photoshop from the DX version in the process. It would have been pretty neat seeing photos of Link's journey in the remake done in the animated art style shown off in the opening and endings of the game. Feels like another missed opportunity to me, to be honest. But anyways, back on track, this whole chamber dungeon thing feels like Nintendo dipping their toes in what a Zelda maker might be like. It has potential to be something great, but if we see a Zelda maker of any kind in the future, there has to be an option to create an overworld map to go along with the dungeons. Otherwise, I just don't think it would work that well. Moving on to the art style, to tell you the truth, I was a little turned off at first by Nintendo's approach here when I first saw the reveal trailer many months ago. You had that gorgeous animated cutscene in the opening, and then it cut to the actual gameplay, and I was like, okay, that seems like a drastic shift in presentation here. But then I went back to the original game, and I thought that the art style chosen actually fits the theme very well and keeps the spirit of the original intact. After all, The Wind Waker was a great example of why never to judge a game based off of visuals alone, and the same thing can be said with the remake of Link's Awakening. It grows on you, and you'll learn to love it. Next up is the music, and I must say, the music presentation here is spot on what I would have imagined it sounding like with a modern day twist. Well, minus the title music anyway. I don't know what it is, maybe it's just my nostalgia kicking in, but I preferred the title music in the original game myself. It just sounded more epic in my opinion. You be the judge. The music that you hear all throughout the island's caves sound great, however, and it really helps give off that eerie vibe I was looking for while exploring these caverns. But if I had to signal out just one track that I really enjoyed, it would have to be the music that plays in the level 4 dungeon. I mean, it sounds like a completely different track. It's amazing. The sound design is equally fantastic. Hearing the chirping birds, insects, and splashing waves as you travel on the overworld map to the dripping water found in the dank, dark caves. It gives off that extra layer of immersion that just wasn't possible on the Game Boy original, and I love it. Overall, despite some of its shortcomings, looking at you unstable frame rate, I really love the remake of Link's Awakening, and if I had to slap a number on here, I'd give it 8.5 windfish eggs out of 10. This game was enjoyable from start to finish, and it managed to bring back that same magic I first felt from playing the original game. I literally had a huge grin on my face when the credits finally rolled. Well done, Nintendo and Grezzo. Well done. So did the game reach my expectations in the end? Well, if you couldn't already tell by this review, I enjoyed it, but then again, I tend to keep my expectations really low down on the bar to begin with, just so I can avoid any disappointment in the end. Hell, I was probably one of the few people who actually enjoyed the Secret of Mana remake we got from Square Enix last year. Was it a perfect game? No, not by any means. Is it ever going to replace the original? Hell no, not by a long shot. But I still had enjoyment out of the game, and it still felt like Secret of Mana to me. The same thing can be said about Link's Awakening on the Switch. I'll still go back and play the original any day. Hell, I do it with Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask on the N64, even though the 3DS versions exist. Though I will argue that the Majora's Mask on the N64 is the better title in my opinion compared to the 3DS version because I didn't like some of the tweaks they made, but that's for another video and another day. Anyways, Grezzo has done an amazing job with the Zelda titles, and I would love to see, as I was playing Link's Awakening remake on the Switch, I was thinking to myself, I would love to see the Oracle games come next, because it only makes sense, right? Because the Oracle games actually take place before Link's Awakening, and it's the same Link. So it would be kind of cool if those were the next titles to be made in a similar light to Link's Awakening. I only hope that they package them together, you know, and I would see the $60 price tag being more justifiable at that. I mean, getting 2 games for the price of 1, and it would make it a better purchase than what Link's Awakening was, because as great as the game is, $60 is a lot to swallow. I mean, it feels more like a $40 game to me, but I digress. Anyways, guys, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to drop a like, and if you didn't, drop a dislike. And have you been playing Link's Awakening? Do you enjoy it? Did you hate it? Go ahead and leave me your thoughts down below. And as always, I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Reach for the stars, guys.